Hey everybody, how's it going? I'd like to discuss an idea that I've had for a long time, and it's called the evolution of music. And it's a philosophy that I've adopted and probably resonates with a lot of musical fans out there that really think as deeply and as passionate about music as I am. Basically, I'll give you an analogy. So, let's say that the first musician ever had a rock. He had two rocks. He took one of those rocks and just did this with the rock. And he thought that was awesome. So, that would be considered to him what would have just been created as music. Let's consider this guy the first musician. So another guy heard this guy hitting the rock off the other rock, and he thought, that's cool. I'm going to do something like that. Except I'm going to make it different. Because everyone wants to be different, you know. So he takes two rocks and he hits it twice. And that guy's like, whoa, that's cool. And then another guy's like, hey, that's cool, I want to do that. So he takes that rock, he takes two rocks and starts going. And then those other two guys join him, and they make some sort of and then 100 years later it's and then, 2,000 years later, it's you know, it's and that's the evolution of music, weirdly explained. And really, the evolution of music is a very interesting thing because I think a lot of people assume that because people played a certain way on records, that means they weren't nearly as good as people now. That's a very, very common misconception, because let's take like the Ink Spots, for example. All their songs kind of start the same, they have different lyrics, same notes, maybe different key, if we're lucky. But does that mean that they were any better or that they were any worse? Let's go back even farther. Let's go back to Bach. Bach was probably, I'm going to argue, one of the greatest guitar players to ever walk the earth. One of the greatest musical artists to ever walk on this planet. He's, in my opinion, better than Beethoven, better than Mozart, better than fucking whatever other classical artist there was. Bach is the friggin' Yngwie Malmsteen, John Petrucci, Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, all combined into one person. He's one of the best guitar players, and that actually can be proven. All I have to do is listen to his stuff. Wow. I'm blown away. He is incredible. And people take that influence, people take Bach, and they take whatever he did and try to add on to it. So you go from a Bach kind of sound to an Ink Spots kind of sound, which is different, but it's moved on from just an instrumental to now there's vocals and there's lyrics and there's meaning to these songs now, and it moves from the Ink Spots to Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin, where they have, a full band instead of just guitars and multiple vocalists. It's maybe two vocalists at most, but a full band now. And you go from things like Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin to things that are more progressive, like, Yes and Genesis and Rush, which have lots more electronic sounds incorporated into it, and they're not maybe quite as heavy, but they have a more progressive sound. They have multiple, odd time signatures, and they have, odd notes, odd riffs, odd melodies, and, unique ideas. And you move from that to bands like, Dream Theater or Opeth, or, things of that nature that are now even heavier and have a lot more complexity. And you move from things like that to, bands of really today. I mean, Dream Theater and Opeth are still around today, but I mean, bands that have been formed in the 2000s and 2010s, like Avenged Sevenfolds, your Five Finger Death Punches, as I really hate to say, your kind of your Shine Downs, those kinds of bands. Your new, and a lot of those have a lot of the quads, a lot of the drum solos, a lot of the fills, and that's not because they were better than past players. That's because they have adopted a different kind of sound. And a lot of people, that's a very common misconception of, instrumentalists. I used to believe that. I used to believe that, the ink spots couldn't really play very well, and that was the height of what people could play. And then after I thought about it, and you go back to the days of Bach was fucking incredible. Bach was probably one of the most incredible guitar player of that time, and really ever. And that's not the best that we can do. There's more. And guitarists like John Petrucci and Joe Satriani and Steve Vai and Yngwie Malmsteen, those kinds of guitarists really take influence from classical artists like Bach and project an electrical, a very hard sound. But sometimes they can bring in softer melodies, because now, the farther music evolves, the more influences there are, the more diverse we get, the more progressive we get. And I think that eventually a new genre is going to be formed that's going to include, all types of music. And it's going to be the ultimate genre, It's, going to involve, as much as I, hate to say it, it's going to involve, like dubstep and fucking pop and progressive. I want to see kind of a progressive metal side mixed with that kind of electronical side. I think that would be an interesting couple. They could really feed off of each other's energy, because they're both very aggressive if they choose to be, but at the same time they can be soft and melodic. Dubstep probably could be more aggressive and, hard-hitting. But, I mean, such is true with progressive metal. You could go either way, because they both have their similarities, but they have large differences as well. And, opposites attract. I think that dubstep and progressive metal specifically could make a good couple. I mean, I think the earliest that I've seen where you could hear a little bit of wub wub, which wasn't really wub wub, is if you listen to Home on Metropolis Part 2. Something like that. And I'm starting to see it more recently, but it's not really only incorporating into the hard rock scene, like things like Korn. That album that Korn made with Skrillex. So yeah, that's my philosophy. I mean, some people agree with it, some people probably don't. Some people think, there's other things, there's other ways that it could work, but I mean, that's the main principle of the idea. And I'm sure a lot of people, share my idea. Lots of people share this theory that I have of, people influence people that influence that people that influence the people that influence that makes the musicians that we have today. And, the technologies we have today as well. Like, we wouldn't be able to make dubstep if dubstep didn't have any sort of influence like early electronica, like Daft Punk, or a little more recent Dead Mouse, things like that. It's not necessarily dubstep, but it's some sort of electronic, origin. So that's my philosophy. If I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to shameless plug, and see you guys later.